The chandeliers threw gold light across 300 faces, and every single one of them turned toward the door when Malia walked in. She had Hyunjun's arm under her hand, his sleeve rough against her palm, and she was laughing at something he'd said in the car, something small, something about how he still wouldn't let her touch the radio. Then the laughing stopped making sense in her mouth, because the room stood up. Not a few people. Everyone. Chairs scraped back in one long wave, glasses lowered, and 300 people rose to their feet like they'd rehearsed it. Malia's eyes went straight to the front of the ballroom, looking for him, the man she'd never met, the fiancé she'd spent 3 weeks strutting. She scanned the crowd near the stage, waiting for some tall stranger in a black suit to step forward and take the moment that belonged to him. Nobody moved from the stage. The chairman came from the side instead, cutting straight across the open floor, straight toward her. Straight toward Hyunjun. He stopped in front of them, lowered his head, just slightly, the way you bow to someone you answer to. "Welcome home, sir." An older woman near the champagne table pressed her hand flat against her chest. A young man in a navy suit set his glass down without drinking from it. Somewhere behind Malia, a camera flash went off, then another. Malia's mouth was still open from the laugh that never finished. She turned her head and looked at Hyunjun, really looked, the way you look at someone when the floor under you has changed shape. He wasn't looking at the chairman. He was looking at her, and his jaw was tight, and he didn't say a single word. Before we dive into the story, are you watching by yourself or with someone? And where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to Afro Korean Scope, where every story brings unexpected twists, intense emotions, and unforgettable journeys. 3 weeks before that night, Malia stood on the curb outside Incheon Airport with one suitcase and a black dress bag slung over her shoulder, and she was already tired of the whole thing. Her father had been dead 13 months. In that time, she'd learned to run his numbers, sign his contracts, sit through meetings where men twice her age tested her on purpose to see if she'd flinch. She hadn't flinched once. But this, flying to Seoul to marry a man she'd never spoken to, because some agreement made before she was born said she had to, this was the first time in a year she felt like she had no say in her own life. A black car pulled up to the curb. The driver got out before it had even fully stopped, came around the hood, and opened the back door without a word. He was maybe mid-30s, plain dark suit, no tie pin, no watch she could see. He didn't smile the way service people are trained to smile. He just held the door and looked at her like he was waiting to see what kind of person she was before deciding anything about her. "You're my ride," she said. "I'm your driver for the week," he said. Hyunjun. Malia. She got in without shaking his hand, because her hands were full, and because she didn't feel like performing politeness for a stranger in a uniform. He didn't ask about her flight. She'd find out later that the staff had all been told the same thing she had, that Hyunjun was a private security driver assigned to her specifically, a precaution given who her father had been to this company. Nobody had lied outright. They'd just never corrected what she assumed on her own. It was a small enough gap for a whole family to slip through without ever having to say a real word out of place. He didn't ask about her father, though she was sure he knew. Everyone in this family seemed to know exactly who her father was and exactly what he'd meant to their company. He just drove, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, and let her sit in silence for the first 20 minutes. She broke it first. "So what's he like?" "The guy I'm supposed to marry." Hyunjun's eyes flicked to the mirror for half a second. "I don't know him well." "Come on. Everybody who works for this family knows him." "I keep my opinions to myself." "That's not an answer." He didn't say anything else for a while. Malia watched the city go by, gray towers and neon signs she couldn't read, and she kept talking because talking was easier than thinking about the wedding. "I heard he's got a temper," she said. "I heard he fired 3 assistants last year for bringing him the wrong coffee." "I hadn't heard that." "I heard he doesn't shake hands with staff. Thinks he's above it." Hyunjun's hand moved on the wheel, just slightly. "People say a lot of things. You're not going to defend him? Would you believe me if I did?" That got the first real laugh out of her since she'd landed, short and surprised. He glanced at her in the mirror again, and this time something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, but close to it, like he was filing the sound away somewhere. They pulled up outside a hotel with more marble in the lobby than Malia had ever stood on in her life. Hyunjun got out first, came around, opened her door. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she expected to. "You'll need a ride tomorrow morning," he said. 9 o'clock. Family breakfast. "Great," she said flatly. "Can't wait to meet the tyrant." He didn't answer that one. But as she walked toward the hotel doors, she looked back once, and he was still standing by the car, watching to make sure she got inside safe before he drove off. 9 o'clock, sharp, he was already at the curb. Malia came down in a gray dress she'd picked because it said nothing about her, not soft, not hard, just armor for a breakfast she didn't want to sit through. Hyunjun opened the door, and this time he looked at her for a second longer than he needed to. "You look like you're going to a funeral," he said. "Feels about right." He almost smiled. She caught the corner of it before he turned back toward the driver's seat. The breakfast was at a private club, glass walls, a table set for 14 people who all seemed to already know each other. Malia sat through 40 minutes of small talk in 2 languages, half of which she couldn't follow, while a woman introduced as Chirin kept refilling her tea and asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if the flight had been all right. Chirin had a laugh that arrived exactly on cue and eyes that never quite matched it. "He'll join the family properly once the details are settled," Chirin said, when someone asked where the groom was. "He's very private. You understand." Nobody at the table so much as glanced toward Hyunjun, who stood near the door the way security detail does, present, unremarkable, easy to look past. Malia would think back on that later and realize how practiced it had been. Not one flicker. Not one slip. A room full of people trained to treat a man like furniture, because that was exactly the story they'd all agreed to tell. Malia didn't understand any of it yet, but she nodded anyway, because nodding was easier than admitting she was furious. When she came back out to the car, Hyunjun was leaning against the hood, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He straightened up fast when he saw her. "How was it?" he said. Not really a question. They talked about him for 40 minutes and he never showed up. She got in without waiting for the door. "You know what I heard in there? He canceled 2 meetings this week because he didn't feel like it." Grown man, running a company, doesn't feel like it. Hyunjun pulled out into traffic. His knuckles were tight on the wheel. Maybe he had a reason. There's no reason good enough for that. She looked out the window, arms crossed. "I keep hearing about how brilliant he is, how driven he is, and then I hear he treats people like furniture. My father built half his career on the idea that you treat everybody the same, driver or CEO. This guy sounds like everything my father wasn't." Hyunjun didn't say anything for 3 full blocks. Then, quiet, "Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I knew." Her voice caught on it, just slightly, and she looked down at her hands instead of at the mirror. "Sorry. You didn't ask for that." "I don't mind." They stopped at a red light. He glanced back at her, and for a second neither of them looked away. "You want to skip the next thing on the schedule?" he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Dress fitting. 2 hours of standing on a platform while 3 women argue about lace." He said it like he was reading off a clipboard, but there was something under it, an offer. "I could take the long way." "You'd still make it." "Just later." Malia looked at him for a second too long. "You'd get in trouble for that." "I've been in worse trouble." She laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised her own chest, and said, "Fine. Long way." He took her along the river instead, past a stretch where the water caught the afternoon light and old men fished off a concrete ledge, and neither of them said much. And it was the first hour since she'd landed in this country that she didn't feel like a piece of furniture being moved into place. By the second week, she stopped waiting for him to open the door before reaching for the handle herself, and he stopped pretending that bothered him. They fell into something that didn't have a name. He picked her up early, dropped her off late, took the long way more than the short one. She told him about her father's business calls, the way he used to let her sit in on them as a kid, quiz her afterward on what she'd noticed. He told her almost nothing about himself, and she noticed that too, filed it away without pushing. One afternoon, Waiting outside a tailor's shop for some cousin's fitting to finish, an older man in a gray suit walked past and said something sharp to Hyunjun in Korean, gesturing at the car like it was parked wrong. Hyunjun's face didn't change, but his shoulders dropped half an inch, the posture of a man absorbing something he'd absorbed 100 times before. Malia caught the tone even without the words. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing. Hyunjun." He said the car was blocking his spot. A pause. "And that I should know better." That's not all he said. She'd seen the way the man's eyes had swept over Hyunjun's uniform, over him, like he was a fixture that had wandered somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. Hyunjun didn't answer, and Malia turned and walked 6 steps toward the man before she'd even decided to do it. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough that 2 people on the sidewalk looked over. "If you have a problem with where the car's parked, you can talk to me. Not him. Not like that." The man's face went through surprise, then something colder, then he muttered an apology that wasn't really one and kept walking. Malia stood there a second longer than she needed to, chest tight, hands in fists at her sides. When she turned back, Hyunjun was watching her like he'd never seen anyone do that before. "Not for him." "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yeah, I did." She got back in the car. "Nobody talks to you like that around me." He stood by the open door a beat too long before he closed it, and when he got in the driver's seat, his hands weren't quite steady on the wheel. The rain came on fast 3 days later, no warning, the kind that turns a street into a river in 20 minutes. Hyunjun was driving her back from a dinner she'd sat through with her jaw clenched, another round of relatives asking when the wedding date would be set, another round of Chiron smiling too wide and saying everything was almost finalized, when the engine coughed twice and died on a stretch of road with no lights. "You're kidding me," Malia said, as he tried the ignition again and got nothing. "Battery, maybe?" Or the rain got into something it shouldn't have. He pulled the hood release and got out into the downpour without hesitating, and she watched him through the windshield, soaked in seconds, leaning over the engine like he actually knew what he was looking at. She got out too. She didn't have to, but she did. "You'll ruin that dress," he said, not looking up. "It's already ruined. Get in, we'll call somebody." They ended up back in the car, both of them dripping, waiting on a tow that wasn't coming for 40 minutes, and the windows fogged up from their breathing, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "Can I ask you something?" Malia said finally, "and you actually answer me this time?" "Depends on the question." "Why do you do this?" "Drive people around." "You're smart. I've heard you correct translations. I've seen you read contracts upside down on somebody's desk like you understood every word. You're not just a driver." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer at all. "I like it," he said. "Nobody wants anything from me when I'm behind the wheel. They just want to get where they're going. That's a strange thing to be grateful for. You'd be surprised." He looked out at the rain instead of at her. "I was engaged once. A long time ago. She found out about some money that was coming to me before I did. Lawyer told her before I even had the chance to propose right." His voice stayed flat, like he'd told himself this story enough times to smooth all the edges off it. "She knew what marrying me was worth. Down to the number. Before I ever asked her." Malia didn't say anything for a second. "Then, that's not love. That's an appraisal. That's what I decided too." He glanced at her, something guarded in it, like he was watching to see what she'd do with what he'd just handed her. She didn't ask what happened to the money, or the family, or any of the questions that would have been easy to ask. She just said, "I'm sorry that happened to you," and meant it plainly, without digging for more. Something in his shoulders let go, the same half-inch they'd dropped outside the tailor shop, except this time it wasn't defeat. It was relief. "You never ask me about the company," he said. "Or the money. Or what my family's worth. 3 weeks, and you've never once asked. Why would I? You're the driver." She caught the way that landed on his face, something complicated crossing it, and she didn't understand it yet, so she kept talking. "I don't care what you're worth. I care that you took the long way by the river. I care that you stood in the rain fixing an engine instead of just calling for help right away." He looked at her for a long moment, rain still running down his temple, and he didn't say anything, but his hand moved an inch closer to hers on the seat between them. Neither of them closed the distance. Not that night. The tow truck came, and the days kept moving, and something had shifted that neither of them named out loud. She started saving things to tell him, a joke from a phone call with her cousin back in Atlanta, a memory of her father teaching her to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table when she was 12. He started arriving 5 minutes early and leaving 10 minutes late, parking somewhere he didn't need to just have another few minutes before he had to hand her off to the family and disappear back into the garage. One evening, he taught her 3 words in Korean, badly, and she butchered all 3, and he laughed, really laughed, head back, the kind of laugh she hadn't heard out of him in 3 weeks of knowing him. "You're terrible at this," he said. "You're a terrible teacher." "I'm an excellent teacher." "You're a terrible student." She threw a balled-up napkin at him from the back seat, and he caught it without looking, and for a second the whole weight of the wedding and the family and the fortune she was marrying into disappeared, and it was just the two of them in a parked car outside a noodle shop, laughing about nothing. That was the night she understood, sitting there with her sides aching from laughing, that she hadn't thought about her actual fiancé in 2 full days. She'd forgotten to be angry at him. She'd forgotten to dread the wedding. She'd stopped thinking about the billionaire entirely because she was too busy falling for the man behind the wheel. The crisis broke on a Tuesday, and Malia found out about it before Hyunjun said a single word, because his hands were shaking slightly on the wheel and he'd missed a turn he never missed. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Hyunjun." "What happened?" He pulled the car over, engine still running, and rubbed his hand down his face. "There's a report going around. Says the company mishandled a supplier contract, cut corners, put people at risk to save money. It's not true, or it's not true the way they're telling it. But it's already in 3 papers, and the board's asking questions before anybody's had a chance to answer them." "Who leaked it?" "I don't know yet." She was quiet for a second, watching him grip the wheel like it was the only solid thing in the car. Then she said, "Okay. Walk me through it. What's actually in the contract, what's actually true, and what's just spin? This isn't your problem to fix." "I didn't ask whose problem it was. I asked you to walk me through it." He looked at her like nobody had ever said that to him before, not like that, not with her sleeves already halfway rolled up. He walked her through it anyway, the supplier, the safety numbers, the timeline that had been twisted just enough to look damning without being a lie. Malia listened the way she used to listen to her father on late-night calls, quiet, absorbing, waiting for the shape of the thing to become clear. "You need the original inspection records," she said finally. "Not the summary somebody handed the press. The actual dates, the actual signatures. If the timeline's been twisted, the paper trail will show it before anybody has to say a word. That could take days to pull. Then you don't have days. You call whoever controls those records tonight." He looked at her for a long moment, something in his face she hadn't seen before, and picked up his phone and made the call right there, in the car, with her watching. She heard him give orders in a voice she hadn't heard from him before, clipped, certain, a voice that belonged to someone who ran things, not someone who drove people to where they needed to go. She noticed it. She filed it away, the same way he'd filed away her laugh 3 weeks earlier. She didn't ask. Over the next 2 days she barely saw him, but when she did, she brought him coffee instead of the other way around, and once she sat outside his office, a small, plain room she'd never seen before, tucked behind the garage, reading through a stack of shipping records with him until midnight, circling dates, cross-checking numbers, because 2 sets of eyes worked faster than one. "You're good at this," he said, around 11, watching her flip through a folder faster than he could keep up. "My father used to say I had a nose for where the lie was hiding in a spreadsheet." She didn't look up. "This one's hiding on page 4. The inspection date doesn't match the shipping manifest. Somebody backdated something." "Who had access to the original files before they went to press?" Malia asked. Hyunjun scrolled through an internal log. 3 people. Legal. The chairman's office. He stopped scrolling. And Chiron's division, she signed off on the press summary herself, 2 days before the story ran. Malia looked at the timestamp. So whoever handed a twisted timeline to the papers had it from someone who already knew it was twisted. "That's not proof," Hyunjun said. "But it's not nothing either." He leaned over her shoulder to look back at the folder, close enough that she could feel him there, and for a second neither of them moved. "Malia," he said, low. "Yeah, I need to tell you something." She looked up at him then, and something in his face was different, open in a way it hadn't been before, like he was standing at the edge of something and trying to decide whether to jump. His mouth opened. The door swung in. An assistant, breathless, holding a phone out. "Sir, they need you on the call now. The board's already dialing in." Hyunjun looked at Malia for one more second, and whatever he'd been about to say folded itself back down inside him. "Later," he said. "I'll tell you later." "Okay," she said, and went back to the folder, not knowing that later was going to arrive in the worst way possible. The crisis broke there way 2 days after that. The records came back clean. The story that ran in the papers on Thursday was a retraction, not a scandal, and somewhere in a boardroom people who'd been ready to panic went quiet with relief. Nobody outside that room knew Malia had helped find the date that cracked the whole false story open. She didn't need them to know. She just liked the way Hyunjun looked at her when he came to find her that night, tired and lighter than she'd seen him in weeks. "We did that," he said. "You did that," she said. "I just found where the lie was hiding." "That's not nothing." He reached for her hand, and this time neither of them pulled back. His fingers closed around hers, warm, certain. "Malia." Her phone rang. Not buzzed, rang. Loud, cutting through whatever he was about to say, and she saw her cousin's name on the screen and picked up out of habit. They set the date, her cousin said, before Malia could even say hello. "The wedding. Next Friday. Chiron just called the family, it's official." Malia's hand was still in Hyunjun's. She looked at him, and he was watching her face change, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, that the wedding neither of them wanted to happen anymore was now 6 days away. And the man standing in front of her had no idea he was the one she was supposed to marry. If this story's got you hooked already, drop a like, leave a comment telling us what you think happens next, and subscribe to Afro Korean Scope so you don't miss where this goes. The engagement gathering was set for the estate outside the city, the kind of place with its own gate and its own staff and a ballroom that could hold 300 people without feeling crowded. Malia stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room that night in a dress Chiron had picked out for her, deep green, expensive, nothing Malia would have chosen herself, and felt like she was dressing for somebody else's life. Hyunjun picked her up at 7, in a suit instead of the driver's uniform, and for a second when he stepped out of the car she almost didn't recognize him. He looked different. Sharper. Like a man stepping into a version of himself he usually kept folded away. "You clean up," she said, trying to make it light. "Don't get used to it," he said, but his eyes stayed on her a beat too long, taking in the dress, the way she'd done her hair, and something passed over his face that looked almost like grief. "You okay?" she said. "I need to tell you something before we go in there. Can it wait? I already feel like I'm walking into an execution." She laughed, but it came out thin. "Let's just get through tonight." He looked at her for a long moment, and something closed back up behind his eyes, the same door that had almost opened in his office 2 nights before. "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Later." She didn't know yet that later kept arriving and dying in his throat every single time. They drove out together, and she reached over at one point and took his hand off the gear shift, just held it, and he let her, thumb moving slow across her knuckles the whole way there. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The estate came up out of the dark like something from a different century, lights strung through the trees, cars lined up along the drive, valets moving fast in white gloves. Hyunjun parked himself, waved off the valet who reached for his keys, and came around to open Malia's door the way he had that very first day at the airport. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said honestly, and took his arm anyway. They walked in together, and for one full minute, it was perfect, chandeliers throwing gold light everywhere, a string quartet playing something soft, Hyunjun's arm steady under her hand. She leaned into him and said something about the radio, some old joke between them by now, and he actually laughed, head tipping back slightly, and she thought, right then, that whatever came after tonight, she wanted more of this. More of him. Whoever the fiancé turned out to be, she already knew who she wanted. Then the room stood up. She felt it before she understood it, the shift of air, the scrape of 300 chairs, and her first thought was pure relief, because it meant he was finally here, the man she was supposed to marry, and this whole strange charade could turn into something honest. She looked toward the front of the room, waiting. Nobody came from the front of the room. The chairman came from the side, cutting straight across the open floor, and Malia's stomach dropped a half-second before her mind caught up, because he wasn't walking toward the stage. He was walking toward them. He stopped in front of Hyunjun, bowed his head, slight and formal, the kind of bow you give someone you answer to, not someone who works for you. "Welcome home, sir." The words landed in Malia's chest like something physical. An older woman near the champagne table pressed a hand flat to her chest. A young man in navy set his glass down without drinking. Somewhere behind her a camera went off, then another, flashes catching her face mid-laugh, the laugh that had nowhere to go now. She turned her head slowly and looked at Hyunjun. He wasn't looking at the chairman. He was looking at her, jaw tight, and he didn't say a single word, because there was nothing left to say that would undo what she was already understanding. Every drive along the river, every rainstorm, every joke about a radio. All of it happening between her and the man she'd been promised to the entire time. "You're him," she said, so quiet almost nobody but him could hear it. He didn't deny it. That was the worst part. He just stood there, in a room full of people bowing to him, and let the silence answer for him. Malia pulled her hand off his arm like it burned. If you've ever had the ground fall out from under you like this, drop a comment. Hit like if you're rooting for Malia right now, and subscribe to Afro Korean Scope so you're here when this story breaks wide open. She didn't remember walking out of the ballroom. She remembered the cold air outside the estate doors, and the sound of her own heels on stone, and Hyunjun's voice behind her, close, urgent. "Malia. Wait." She turned on him fast, in the middle of the drive, valets and guests still filing past on either side. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Hyunjun, and you let me sit in that car telling you how arrogant my fiancé was. You let me defend you to some old man on the street like you were the one who needed protecting. I was going to tell you. When? Tonight? After the vows. Her voice cracked and she hated that it did. You had 100 chances. The rain. Your office. Right there in the car 2 nights ago, you said later, and you keep saying later, and later was supposed to happen before 300 people bowed to you in front of me. I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does. His voice was low, urgent, but steady, like he'd rehearsed this 100 times in his head, and it still wasn't coming out right. Every woman my family has ever put in front of me already knew the number before they knew my name. You didn't. For 3 weeks you looked at me like I was just a man. I wasn't ready to lose that. So you let me fall for a lie instead. You didn't fall for a lie. He stepped closer, and she stepped back. Everything I told you in that car was true. The rain was real. What I felt when you stood up for me outside that tailor shop was real. None of that changes because of a bow in a ballroom. It changes everything, she said, because I don't even know who I was talking to. She walked to the first car in the line, one of the family drivers she didn't recognize, and got in without looking back, and Hyunjun stood in the drive and watched the taillights until they turned out of sight, and he didn't chase her. Because chasing her right then would have been for him, not for her. She didn't go back to the hotel. She had the driver take her to the small guest house on the edge of the property where her father used to stay on business trips, a place she'd found in his old calendar entries months ago and asked to see once, out of nothing but grief. She sat on the porch steps in her green dress until 2 in the morning, phone in her lap, not calling anyone. At some point she went inside and found a box in the closet, unmarked, dust along the top edge, something the staff had apparently kept without knowing what to do with it. Papers. Her father's handwriting on some of them, notes in the margins the way he used to write when he was building an argument in his head before a meeting. She almost put the box back. She didn't. Near the bottom was a folder with her name on it. Not her legal name, her nickname, the one only her father used, the one nobody in this family should have known. Inside was a letter, dated 4 years before he died. If you're reading this, something happened to me before I got to explain it myself. I need you to know what I built here wasn't charity and it wasn't luck. 15 years ago, I put money into this company when everybody else was pulling theirs out because I believed in the people running it more than I believed in the numbers on a page. The chairman's father told me once, "You don't bet on companies, you bet on the people." I believed him. I bet everything. What came from that bet belongs to you now. Not a gift. Not a dowry. A stake. Real ownership, written into the company's structure, held quietly until you were old enough to understand what it meant. The family knows. They've always known. I asked the chairman to make sure you were told the truth the day you turned 30, married or not, whether I was here to tell you myself or not. If you're finding this sooner than that, someone moved faster than I planned for, and you should ask why. Don't let anyone tell you that you're only there because of who you're marrying. You were there before any of that was ever discussed. You were there because of me. Malia read it twice, sitting on the floor of a guest house she'd never been in before, and somewhere in her chest the anger she'd been carrying since the ballroom found a second target, colder and sharper than the first. The family knew. Chirin, who'd smiled through 40 minutes of breakfast and never once mentioned it. Chirin, who'd handled every detail of this wedding down to the color of the tablecloths. She'd been engineered into this marriage twice, once by an arrangement she never agreed to, and once by people who knew exactly what she was owed and had decided, quietly, to make sure she married her way into forgetting to ask for it. And her father had built in a safeguard, a date, a promise, that someone had clearly worked around. She picked up her phone at 3 a.m. and called the one person who might actually help her prove it, even though she hated that he was still the first name in her head. Hyunjun answered before the first ring finished. "Malia, I need you to tell me everything you know about my father's stake in this company," she said. "And I need you to tell me if your cousin's name is anywhere near it." The silence on the other end went on a beat too long, and that alone told her she already had part of her answer. If this twist just changed everything for you, hit like, drop a comment on what you think Chirin's role really is, and subscribe to Afro Korean Scope. We've got more of this story coming. He came to the guest house at 4 in the morning, still in the suit from the night before, tie on, top button open. Malia let him in without a word and set the folder down on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "I didn't know about the letter," he said, reading it fast, his face changing as he got to the part about the stake. "I swear to you, I didn't know it went this deep. But you knew something." He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "I knew there was a dormant share allocation tied to your father's name. Everyone assumed it was a formality, a symbolic gesture the family made after he died, nothing active. I never looked closer because I had no reason to." He looked up at her. "Chirin manages that division. She would have been the first person to see any activity on it. She would have been the only person," Malia said. "And she never said a word to me. Not once. 40 minutes of breakfast, 3 weeks of wedding planning, and she never mentioned that I already owned a piece of the thing everyone was trying to marry me into. If she buried it," Hyunjun said slowly, "she had a reason." "The crisis," Malia said. "The leak. The falsified inspection dates." She was thinking out loud now, the same way she used to think through her father's contracts at the kitchen table. "You already found her name on the press summary. What if that wasn't just carelessness? What if it was cover, something to keep the board distracted and the wedding moving fast, before anybody had time to ask questions about ownership?" Hyunjun's jaw tightened. She had access to those records. She had motive to keep the board looking the wrong way. "You need proof of the transfer itself, not just the leak." "I know where to get it." He stood up, already reaching for his phone. "There's a private server, records of every internal transfer tied to family shares going back 20 years. Chirin has access. So do I. If she moved on your father's stake, or tried to, it'll be logged, even if she thought she buried it." They drove back to the estate before the sun came up, the two of them alone in a car for the first time since the ballroom, and neither of them mentioned the ballroom, because there wasn't room for it yet. There was only the work in front of them. The office was empty at 5 in the morning, and Hyunjun pulled the records up on a private terminal, hands moving fast, Malia leaning over his shoulder reading dates the same way she'd read the supplier records 2 weeks earlier. "There," she said, pointing. 6 weeks ago. A transfer request, filed under a shell entity, moving a percentage of unassigned family shares into a holding company. Look at the signature. Chiron's initials small, in the corner of the digital record. How does she even have the authority to move something like that alone? Malia asked. She doesn't. Not officially. Hyunjun kept scrolling. Transfers over a certain size need a second signature. Hers is here. And under it, he tilted the screen toward her, a proxy authorization. Filed under my name. I never signed this. Malia stared at the forged line. She used your name to move my father's shares. Which means this isn't just theft anymore, Hyunjun said quietly. It's fraud, with my signature on it. She wasn't just betting I wouldn't notice. She was betting I wouldn't survive finding out. Malia sat back in the chair, the full shape of it landing on her at once. She used the wedding as cover to steal from a dead man. And she used you to do it. She used a lot of things as cover, Hyunjun said. Including me. The office door opened. Chiron stood in the frame, still in last night's clothes, a coat over her arm like she'd just walked in from somewhere else. Her eyes went from Hyunjun to Malia to the screen behind them, and whatever calm she usually wore slipped, just for a second, before she caught it and pulled it back into place. You're both up early, she said. Sit down, Chiron, Hyunjun said. We need to talk about a transfer you filed 6 weeks ago. And a signature that isn't mine. Her eyes flicked to the screen again, and this time she didn't bother pretending. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, slow, deliberate, like a woman deciding there was no version of this conversation worth running from. 9 years, she said, before either of them could speak. I have run that division for 9 years. I have kept this company standing through 2 scandals your father's little handshake deal never had to touch, because I did the work while everyone else got the credit. Her voice didn't rise. It stayed level, almost tired. And the day you marry her, nothing changes for me. I stay the cousin who's good at her job. You become chairman because you were born into it. Not because you fought for it. Not because you earned it the way I have, every single year, in a building full of men who still ask me to get their coffee. That doesn't give you the right to steal from a dead man's daughter, Malia said. I wasn't stealing, Chiron said. I was correcting an oversight. Your father's stake was never meant to sit outside family control forever. It was a courtesy nobody expected to matter. It mattered to him enough to write me a letter about it, Malia said, and her voice didn't shake now. It mattered enough that he called it a promise. You don't get to decide what a dead man's promises are worth. The leak, Hyunjun said. The supplier story. You signed off on that summary 2 days before it went to press. You needed the board distracted and the wedding moving before anyone had time to look at the share records. Chiron didn't flinch. The story wasn't false. I just didn't rush to correct the parts that bought me time. That was as close to a confession as she was going to give, and everyone in the room knew it. You're right that it isn't fair, Hyunjun said quietly. What happens to you in this family? I've thought that for years, and I never said it to your face, and that's on me. His voice hardened. But this, what you did, this isn't the answer to unfairness. This is just you deciding somebody else should pay for it. And you were willing to burn my name to do it. Chiron didn't answer that. She just stood there, coat over her arm, unmoved, unapologetic, and for a second nobody in the room said anything at all. If Chiron's got you conflicted right now, that's the point. Drop a comment on whether you think she deserves any sympathy, hit like, and subscribe to Afro Korean Scope so you're here for the finale. The board convened at 9 that morning, faster than any meeting Malia had seen called in 3 weeks of watching this family move. No waiting, no polished agenda. Just 11 people around a long table and a printout of a forged proxy authorization sitting in the middle of it, like something that had crawled up from underground. Hyunjun stood at the head of the table instead of sitting, and Malia stood beside him, not behind him. 6 weeks ago, Hyunjun said, a request was filed to move an unassigned family share allocation into a holding company outside this family's direct control. That allocation was never unassigned. It belonged to David Whitfield, and upon his death, to his daughter. He set the letter down, David's handwriting visible even from where Malia stood. The transfer used a forged authorization under my name. The same signature also cleared a press summary that misrepresented safety records 2 days before that story broke and rattled this entire board. Chiron sat near the far end, spine straight, hands folded. Nobody had raised their voice. She simply sat and let the record speak, because there was nothing left to argue. "I did what I believed the company needed," she said, when the chairman finally turned to her. 9 years, and none of it was ever going to be enough to matter in this room. "You didn't build David Whitfield's stake," the chairman said, quiet, final. "You tried to take it. And you forged a signature to do it. Nobody voted. Nobody needed to." By the time Malia and Hyunjun walked out of that room an hour later, Chiron's access had already been suspended, the forgery already flagged for legal review. The whole machinery of the company closing around the breach the way a body closes around an infection. Malia didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollowed out, and she still hadn't decided what to do about the man walking beside her down the long marble hallway. "You didn't have to back me in there," she said. "You could have let the board handle it quietly. Kept your name out of it." "I wasn't backing you," he said. "I was standing where I should have been standing 3 weeks ago. Next to you. As myself." He stopped walking, and she stopped too. "I should have told you the first night, when you called me a stranger holding a door. I'm sorry. Not for hiding it first, I understand why I did that. I'm sorry for every day after, when I knew what you were to me and still let you walk into that ballroom not knowing." "I need time," Malia said. "Not because I don't believe you. Because I need to know the difference between missing the man in the uniform and trusting the billionaire who is hiding behind it." "Take it," he said. "I'll be here." She didn't take his hand that night. She walked to her car alone, and this time, he let the distance stand. Malia didn't stay in Seoul. Her father's stake gave her a real voice in the company, and she used it from a distance for a while. Board calls from Atlanta, quarterly visits handled strictly as business, her name on paperwork instead of a wedding invitation. She built her own consulting firm on the side, something entirely hers, no family name attached to it but her own. She didn't hear from Hyunjun for a long time. Not because he didn't reach out, he did, twice, short messages she didn't answer, not out of anger anymore, but because she genuinely didn't know what she'd say. 7 months later, she flew back to Seoul for a shareholder meeting, walked out of the glass doors of the company building afterward, and he was standing across the plaza, hands in his pockets, waiting the way he used to wait outside a hotel with a car running. No uniform. No suit built for a boardroom. Just a plain jacket, like a man who'd stopped trying to be anything for anyone else's benefit. She stopped a few feet from him. Neither of them said anything for a second. "I never stopped loving you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way she used to in the front seat of that car, checking for the truth under the words. She found it. She smiled, small, careful, but real. "Then this time," she said, "don't come as my fiancé." He didn't move. He waited, the same patient stillness he'd had the very first day, holding a car door and giving her room to decide who she wanted him to be. She crossed the last few feet between them and took his hand. "Come as yourself." Whatever came next, a life together, a company they'd both have a real stake in, a love that didn't need a title to be true. Neither of them needed to promise it in that plaza. They just stood there, hands together, no chandeliers, no bowing crowd, nobody watching but the two of them. If this ending got you right in the chest, you know what to do. Like this video, tell us in the comments what you think their next chapter looks like, and subscribe to Afro Korean Scope for more stories like this one.